Thank you, Roberto. Well, thanks everybody for joining us again. We're going to be doing a brief overview of redistricting, and MALDEF and I know Latino Policy Forum were both available for more in-depth conversations, more in-depth versions of this information, and also, how we can, learning how we can best support your organizations or you as individuals as you're advocating for your redistricting. It is such a privilege that we all have to be able to be working or advocating in this space. Where every 10 years we have the opportunity to draw legislative districts. And as we'll get into in a bit, we are in an unprecedented time in US history, and Illinois is one of the first states to redistrict after a frankly great and also disastrous, very mixed 2020 census, historic, and we all have the opportunity to be working on this as individuals. So we will all look back and we will be, not us necessarily as individuals, but our work is going to be in the history books of how did the United States respond to all of the crises that happened around the 2020 census and redistricting. Briefly about the timeline that we have here. So starting in March of earlier this year, we had the General Assembly start doing redistricting hearings. And of course, as we all heard at the beginning of this presentation today, we've had the privilege of having, for the first time, two Latinos, Senator Omar Aquino and Representative Lisa Hernandez, being in the chair, being in the real driver's seats of redistricting for Illinois. But that doesn't mean that the process is going perfectly. There is a lot of room for advocacy for you to say what your thoughts are along the process. This process of the hearings, we're going to expect that the hearings and opportunity to weigh in on maps is going to continue through the end of May. And we've been hearing that there is a June 30th deadline that is both in the both in the Illinois Constitution as a redistricting deadline, but also what the legislature has set as a target date. So we can expect that this process is really going to gear up through May and into June. In the Constitution, there is also a backup so that if they miss that deadline, there is a deadline, there is a process called a backup bipartisan commission. So this is also appointed and it is also managed and run by the legislature. And we've seen this commission come into place over the last a few different decades since the Illinois Constitution was updated in 1970. So in the last 50 years, a few times they've gone to this commission. We don't expect probably that it'll go to the commission this time from everything we're hearing from the legislature. But if it does, we're going to see a process that usually ends up in one of the two major parties, the Democrats or the Republicans, drawing the map by having a majority on the commission. So that deadline will probably be around October 5th, is be the latest that we're going to see redistricting for the state to go into. In addition to that, there is also a parallel deadline that's being run by the counties, where the counties are going to be looking at passing a map before July 1st of 2021. So really, we're going to be seeing kind of this process from both the legislature and the counties together with these tight deadlines. And these are both tied to the fact that these elections are going to be on the ballot in spring, in March of 2022. So we're really racing the deadlines to have the maps drawn, and we have elected officials, elected and candidates for elected office, on the ballot and running up to that. And then you may be wondering, we've mentioned about the counties and we've mentioned about the state, but what does this mean for local jurisdictions? Well, you see at the bottom on December 1st of 2021, that is the deadline for the city of Chicago. So after all of the advocacy and all of the process for redistricting for the state and the counties and some other jurisdictions that we'll get into in a bit, we're also going to see the cities, most particularly the city of Chicago, redistrict over the winter. So there's a lot of opportunities here for advocacy. Roberto, next slide, please. So really important about, what is the legal landscape about what redistricting means. And this is one area that MALDEF has been passionate about and has been advocating on in Illinois since our office was founded in the 1980s. There is right here, apologize for the numbering, but there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different key principles for you to understand. And these are all ranked in terms of importance. But as you'll see, these principles are all actually fairly common sense. So to begin with, the districts, when they're drawing it, they're looking at to make sure that they're substantially equal in population. So this is what the Supreme Court has told us decades ago is the standard. And it's the fact that constitutionally, they have to account for very, very nearly equal in total population. So that means that the census, as it counted everybody, counted people who are non-citizens, people who were even undocumented individuals, everybody who's living in the state gets counted in the census. And then that actual population that we just found out from the 2020 census results that were released, kind of the biggest picture of it, of what is the total state population. Now, not where everybody is, but who is actually residing in the state as of the census, that many of the groups on this call and on this panel worked so hard to make sure that everybody was counted. Looks like we're going to have 12,812,508. So Illinois population actually shrunk a little bit, and the maps are going to look very different. On top of that, you see what the current maps are divided into, that this is all old numbers. So when they were originally drawn back in the 2011, based on 2010 census information, congressional maps had about 712,000 people each, and the state house districts had 108,000 people each. And all of these were drawn exactly, to that number. There's a handful of them that are +1, just to make sure that they're even, because they're dividing that number by the number of congressional seats and the state house districts. But it's pretty common sense, substantially equal in population. Contiguous, what does that mean? Just means that you can walk to any part of the district. It means that everything has to be connected, has to be compact. Now, this is something that they can work out, and scientists spend a lot of time mathematically formulating compactness. But compactness is basically meaning it has to be pretty solid together, but the lines can be stretched, especially for minority populations. So that part of the compliance with the Minority Voting Rights Act by the Federal Voting Rights Act and the Illinois Voting Rights Act of 2011, on top of that, constitutional protections, means that the Latino community, the African American community, and the Asian community, among others, including Native American groups, have a federal right to remedy, to have protections and remedies from past discrimination by actually having majority minority districts under federal law. So the best example of that in the Midwest in Illinois is the 4th congressional district, which is, of course, currently represented by Congressman Chuy Garcia. It was created in the 1990s and to keep Latino populations together so that Latinos could have an effective voice in Congress. And there's many other districts in in Illinois that are minority majority. So these are all federal rights. But it's important for us to understand that the federal right is just the minimum. It's really incumbent upon us to be asking for more. And the key part of that is by asking to keep communities of interest together. So that could mean Latino areas, or areas that speak Spanish, or areas that have similar businesses or have similar state boundaries. Those are similar local boundaries. These are all communities of interest that should be considered. And of course, like as I mentioned, these are all ranked. So most important, substantially equal in population. And then the thing that is very important, but is at the bottom of the list, communities of interest after all of these things. So this is what you'll see when the maps are released, that maps have to be compliant with these principles. Next slide, please.
1 second, Stephen. Let me actually pull up the other PowerPoint because the formatting was messed up. So give me 1 second here.
No problem. I can actually start talking about some of the next principles that I believe are in the next slide. So when we're talking about majority protections, we're talking about, as I mentioned, Latinos, African American groups, Asian groups, and the Federal Voting Rights Act and the Illinois Voting Rights Act together create a right to minority majority districts and then also influence districts. So minority majority districts are, as you can imagine, that means that the population is more than 50% Latino, or more than 50% Asian, or more than 50% African American. This is done to prevent vote dilution. So what could happen, and has happened in the past and still happens in many states and local jurisdictions, is that there is either conscious or just so happens that they put Latinos that are right next to each other in a community in separate districts, and that dilutes their vote because neighbors on opposite sides of the street, if they're put in different districts, even though they visit the same grocery store, they have the same schools, they don't have that same voice in the election process. And the important thing is not necessarily that we get Latinos elected into office. It's that whoever is elected into office is elected by the Latinos, whether they're Latino or anybody else. And that means that they have to listen to the voters. They're scared of primaries. They're scared of general elections. And they really want to make sure that they hold town halls, that you know them, that the neighborhood supports them. And it's that idea that the person has the trust of the community that makes for effective legislators and effective legislation. And so we're so thankful to have so many great Latino elected officials and officials that are elected from Latino communities on the Latino caucus that really listen to us and listen to our concerns and propose policy solutions that really impact our communities. In 2011, they also passed this other law that's not federal, but it's state, called the Illinois Voting Rights Act of 2011. And so it says the legislature has to make a conscious decision to draw minority majority districts. So it's not enough for them to ignore Latinos if they cannot draw 50% plus districts. They also have to take it very seriously if they can draw out something in the 40s or even less. They have to give Latinos an effective voice to be at the table. Now, there's 3 different numbers that you should know about when you're talking about redistricting, and we want to be very clear about what they mean. Total population is counted in the census. We're all counted, including undocumented individuals, and that's what the total population means, is that everybody, every resident, and that's what that number that I mentioned earlier for the entire state. But not everybody in that number is an adult, and not everybody is an eligible voter. So as a proxy for that, for actual voting power, we look at what's called the voting age population, which simply means the people who are over 18. So that's how we create Latino majority and African American and Asian majority districts, is that we're looking to say it's not enough to have Latinos there, but they have to be Latino adults in high enough proportion to really make a difference. And then we have to have it high enough, that number, to actually account for what's called the citizen voting age population, which basically means who can vote. So if that number is below 50% itself, then that means that, even if every Latino shows up at the polls, it's very likely that they will be outvoted by the majority or by other communities. And so it's not really an effective district. So these are all 3 numbers that are used. The total population comes from the census 2020. The voting age population comes from American Community Survey data that's used as a supplement to total population. And the voting age population can also come from the census, because the census tells us what people's racial demographics and what age they are. It's only that last one, the citizen voting age population, that we have to supplement from other sources like the American Community Survey. But the primary source of information that has always been used is what happens from the census results, which we saw was released, and we know what Illinois' total population was. Next slide, please. You should know very briefly that there is other redistricting that's happening. So there is a tight timeline before the 2022 general elections for congressional districts, for county commissioner districts, and for judicial districts. So these are all ones that you're going to hear about in the summer, or you might not hear about. These are oftentimes very kind of closed off. They're done kind of in a rush by county boards, by other election jurisdictions. And so, keep an eye on your communities and really find out what's happening in your county level. There's a lot of interesting things that we need to work on in the state. We can't ignore these other things. And then going into the fall, that's when the city of Chicago, other cities and towns and villages will be redistricting if they have districts. And so really important to keep an eye on that, and not just where the lines are drawn, but some counties can make decisions to cut county board seats too, to maybe even say they had 24 commissioners and they go down to 22. Well, that number of how many board seats there are can be very important in determining whether Latino communities can get a majority district or even a real effective voice. So keep an eye and make sure that they're not cutting your county board without you having a say in it. Next slide, please. This is very briefly something that you can do to advocate for your community. You can You can testify at redistricting hearings, contact your legislator, contact your alderman, your board commissioner, your county board commissioner, like all of these different processes. The most important thing is that you have your voice heard, and we'll hear in a bit from the wonderful community advocates that are joining us, that what they've done for their communities. Next slide, please. And I'll pass it over to Roberto.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm going to go through these slides quickly because I think the heart of this conversation, I think, really does come from our community organizations and what they've experienced. So quickly here, growth of Latino representation, just to give folks an understanding of where we've been and kind of to understand where we're going. This is kind of a brief breakdown of where we've been as far as representation in the state legislature. As you can see, each year we have grown. Essentially where we're at 2021, that's as of this legislative session. So we're at 9 House of Representatives, 6 senators. Moving forward, we hope and expect that to continue growing. This is kind of a visual representation of where we're kind of located, where Latinos are located as far as representation in the state legislature. This is the 2010 breakdown and percentage of the representatives that are currently in the state legislature. As you can see here, this is, I believe, the north side of Chicago, starting over at Montclair to Logan Square, down to Humboldt Park, Portage Park to Logan Square, Irvin Park and Avondale. Again, VAP stands for voting age population, which, as Stephen mentioned, is really kind of the indicator that maps are drawn at. For the Senate, we do have the 2nd and the 20th represented by Senator Aquino and Senator Bastion-Zayas. Again, these are the visuals of what I just mentioned. Moving over to the southwest side, as you can see, this part of the map has the most districts that are Latino influence or Latino majority. Starting over in district number 1 with Representative Ortiz, Gage Park, Archer Heights. 2nd, Representative Ma, Chinatown, Lower West, McKinley Park. The 21st by Representative Gonzalez over at South Lawndale through Forest View. The 22nd, that's needs to be edited. I believe Representative Guerrero Cuellar is now representing the 22nd over at West Elsden and Clearing. Zalewski at North Berwyn and Cicero and Bridgeview. And of course, Leader Lisa Hernandez, South Berwyn and Cicero. In the southwest side, there are 3 Senate districts represented by 2 Latinos. And 1 non-Latino, Senator Munoz over in the near southwest, that represents House District 1 and 2. Senator Selena Villanueva, which is the far southwest side, that represents House 21st and 22nd District. And then Senator Landick, which is the Berwyn-Cicero area, and that's the 23rd and 24th House. Once again, kind of pointing at what we've talked about here from a visual perspective. And then finally, these are the suburbs. And this is a very interesting conversation to have because we are growing, Latinos are growing in the suburbs. And so understanding the percentages where we were in 2010 and to see where we will be after we receive the census numbers in 2020, we can only expect that those numbers have increased. So 83rd, I believe, is Barbara Hernandez over the Aurora area. Representative Willis over by the South O'Hare, that at the time in 2010 was drawn at 50% Latino voting age population. Again, can only assume that that will increase, as well as Representative Mayfield in the Waukegan area and Representative Moeller in the Elgin area. And then the 44th and 85th, those are non-Latino plurality districts, but we can, again, only imagine that they will grow as well. Over at the Senate, we have Leader Castro and Leader Villa, who are representing non-Latino majority districts. Stephen, do you want to talk about the hearings here?
Sure, thank you, Roberto. So the Illinois Senate and the Illinois House have held redistricting hearings that many of you have either testified or have have produced or have submitted written testimony on. These hearings are winding down at the moment, but I believe that there are still opportunities to submit written testimony. And once maps are actually released, they will have an opportunity for us to comment on what final maps are, what are concerns, what are things that we like about them even. So what are all these different opportunities. The map that you see before you right now is the map that the Senate released for their assignments. The House is similar in that they are really giving opportunities for people to be in the lead on hearing back from their constituents in their areas. So if you are out in the suburbs, you can reach out to your local senators and representatives to provide your feedback. And the same if you are in the city or if you are in more rural areas. So just making sure that your voice is heard and that you're reaching out to all these different points of contact.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm going to ask Linda and Dulce if they can pop their videos back up. Thank you so much. I know Linda was just on right now. Let's start off. Linda, you said you had a couple of slides to share. If you want to go ahead and do that, you should have access. Let me know if you don't. In the meantime, Stephen, can we pop in the link to the Senate Redistricting Committee website?
Yeah.
I know we showed the maps, but I think folks having that link would be perfect so they can.
Absolutely. And and if you would like to testify, there's information there, and I will also drop the link to the House because the House and the Senate have different processes, but they're going to pass one single map. So really important for both chambers to hear your thoughts.
Thanks, Stephen. So we'll begin. I know that both Dulce and Cesar and Linda, all three testified. I'll start off with Cesar asking kind of to explain your experience and really what you testified and what really the messaging was about when you talked to our lawmakers around redistricting and whatnot.
Yeah, I'll do my best to remember. Again, my name is Cesar Nunez. I'm an associate director with Enlace Chicago, and Enlace is a founding member of UCRO, United Congress of Community and Religious Organizations. And working with UCRO, we want to ensure that our communities of color are all represented. And so, if anyone's familiar with the Little Village community, and they shared, some of our elected officials, and we have Senator Villanueva, Representative Gonzalez, Representative Hernandez. We have Commissioner Anaya. We have Alderman Rodriguez, Alderman Cardenas, the Congressman Garcia, and so those surnames are all Latinx surnames, right? And representative of our community. All communities across this state do not have that luxury and do not have those individuals that are able to be leaders for them and for their communities. And so in working with UCRO, we're working to draw a unity map that covers the city of Chicago, the greater city of Chicago, and ideally as much of the state as possible, so that we're able to create a map where all communities are able to have individuals that look like them, talk like them, eat the same food that they eat, go to the same churches that they go to, right? Listen to the same music, and can relate to one another. And so in 2010, to give you an idea, the UCRO was involved in redistricting back then as well. And so at the end of the 2010 redistricting, the all but one of the Black districts were protected. There were 6 new Latino districts that were drawn, and 4 new Asian American influenced districts were drawn. And so, you know, they went from, the Asian American community went from having 0 to 5 Asian Americans in the General Assembly. And so, you know, I think we want to work to make similar strides for our communities for this 2020 redistricting process. And so, you know, we're just trying to be at the table with like-minded individuals, communities, to make sure that we're able to have individuals representing our communities that they're coming from our communities, right? And we know it's so much easier said than done. And with the timelines that have been posted, there isn't a lot of time, right? We know that the census didn't, you know, happen as we planned. So, you know, the information is still trickling down, yet folks have already drawn maps. And so, you know, is the information they're using accurate? And we're learning that there's a minimum of 42,000 individuals that are not being taken into consideration for maps that are being drawn right now. And that's a minimum, right? The estimate can run to over 100,000 individuals. And we know, just from experience of the census, the majority of those individuals are people of color, right? That, you know, there's so many reasons that, and we all experience them, why we didn't get counted, you know? And so now maps are underway that, again, are going to limit the potential for our communities. And, right, you know, we hear minority, It's like, we're no longer the minorities, right? Collectively, we're the majority. Yet, we're not resembled, you know, across the state. And so, just a couple of things to throw out there, right? And, you know, hopefully we can see some improvement, and folks are listening to us, right? So thank you.
Thank you, Cesar. No, you bring up some very important points there. And I'm going to pivot to Dulce. I know that you all at Mano a Mano testified, and from what I hear, didn't have, you can say, the best of experiences. If you can talk about that, and also essentially what was, you know, the ask or the message when you did talk to legislators.
Yeah, so at Mano a Mano, I think, you know, going back to Stephen's point, you know, we know that the Illinois legislature is redrawing maps, but we also know that at the county level, that's happening as well. And so we're also keeping our eye on that. For us, you know, just the process has been obviously not as transparent. If you're not in the ins of what's happening with the Illinois legislature, just as a regular community member, you wouldn't even know that this was happening. And so we have a problem with that. We believe that community engagement, public engagement is absolutely necessary. I'm really also just a little bit disappointed, especially in the Democratic Party, because they push for us organizations to get all these census dollars. Our staff, our community members, our volunteers work so hard to get everyone counted. And now for the Illinois legislature to not want to wait for the 2020 census, to me, it just really doesn't make sense, right? But not only that, so on the Illinois legislature is choosing to use the American Community Survey, as Stephen mentioned, and we just feel that that's not reflective, especially here in the suburbs. We know that there's been a lot of shift within our communities, especially in the Lake County area, with Latinos moving from one, community such as Waukegan to maybe Mundelein or Round Lake Park, which are predominantly, Latino communities. And so for us, it's really imperative that, we get it right. And as I have said, to our elected officials, we're going to be stuck with these maps for the next 10 years. So we have to make sure that this is done right and it's not rushed. So some of the issues that we've had, obviously, some of the things that Stephen mentioned, that this is being done behind closed doors. There is opportunity for testimony, but this is done during the day when people are at work. This is done via, Zoom. And so the technology is also sometimes a barrier to our community members. But also there's not a lot of education that's being done to our community members as to, the impacts of what this could mean for them, right? And so for us, language access has been pretty difficult. So for example, at the county board level, if you wanted to testify, there's not anyone there that can translate, or if you provide testimony in Spanish, the county board members might not get it until a week later. Another issue that we've had, it's kind of like, it feels like it's, if they do an engagement, it's like checking off a box. Like, oh, we talked to the Black people. Oh, we talked to the Latino people. And, we did our due diligence, and now we're going to go make our maps. And we're going to make our maps, and we're going to present them and give you maybe 3 to 5 business days to give any feedback, but we're going to vote on them. And so just the whole process has been really, really rushed. We obviously want this to be, more available to our community members. I think one of the concerns that we have here at Mano a Mano in Lake County is that we know that the county is, and they've openly said this, so I feel comfortable saying this, that they're going to cut seats. And so what does that mean for, our community members? Mano a Mano serves the entire Lake County area. And so that is a concern. Thankfully, we did push, and now they're going to do 2 public listening sessions, one in Mundelein, one in Round Lake Park. But still, I think as, right now, community organizations that are up to capacity, we're dealing with COVID, we're dealing with rental utility assistance. It's kind of like we have to pivot really quickly as to, what is it that needs our attention now. And I'm grateful for our Illinois legislature, our Latinos that are working hard for us, but I think they could have done a better job of at least informing the community about the process ahead of time. I know because we have good relationships with our elected officials here, we learned about the House public hearing through one of our House representatives that said, hey, this is happening next week. Maybe you should give some testimony. And it's like, okay, we reached out to Change Illinois. We know that they're doing some work on redistricting. We also reached out to MALDEF, to get some insights from them, because obviously we want to make sure that we do our due diligence. But it does put the heavy load on the community organizations, right, to provide this type of not only education, because redistricting can be a little bit wonky and a little bit hard to understand to just the normal community member. But at least, we're grateful for Latino Policy Forum, for MADA, for Change Illinois, so that we're able to utilize you guys as resources to see, how can we be the best advocates for our community members. So it just has been feeling like the whole process is just really rushed. And I'm hoping that whatever public input we do provide, that, they do take it into consideration. So that has been our experience over here in the northern suburbs.
Thank you, Dulce. Really, though, we should be thanking you and Cesar and Linda for what you do and really putting our electeds and those in power, their feet to the fire, if you will. So thank you for being candid in your experience. I think it's very important to understand everybody's experiences. Then I will pivot to Linda to talk about what you've done around redistricting and really why redistricting is important to mujeres. And kind of the work that you've been doing and will do in going forward.
Sure. I'm just going to share my screen, and I apologize if I am not the best when it comes to technology, but for us, and I'm so grateful to learn from Cesar and Dulce about their stories with regards to this, because it really is enlightening how, depending upon the county that you're in, your story is very different. For mujeres, we provided written testimony on behalf of our viewpoints with regards to redistricting and the recommendations that we wanted to set forth. And they were very similar to, our other colleagues. One thing I think that is, really startling for us is that we, as many of you were part of the Census 2020 efforts, and I'm so glad Cesar brought it up, is that we worked, like so many of you, on these campaigns. And we know that they were in many ways difficult because of COVID, but also because sometimes, the resources that we had were limited and oftentimes not as allocated as properly or swiftly as we needed to. So for our point of view, it's for us to tell our story about how we grew in the suburbs, because we want to make sure that, when they think about redistricting, that they really understand whatever data they're looking at, they have to also take into account the experiences of not-for-profits working in these communities. And so, our testimony really kind of concentrated on how, although Mujeres has been around for 48 years, 2020 was the fourth census campaign that we worked on. The first one we ever did was 1990, is to really explain our growth, both in the suburbs as well as in our Brighton Park, because we have 3 offices. And just really emphasizing again, just as Stephen showed us kind of the slides of where we have Latino or people of color representation for our districts, we are coinciding with that, but that is not enough. And so highlighting some really top level information about the growth in the last 2 years, because we added a third office. We had to expand our North Riverside office. Another thing that we wanted to also highlight is just the suburban presence. We have been in the Cook County suburbs since 2006. That this is something that we have firsthand witnessed, how the amazing growth of our community has led us to increase our office like 3 times, and most recently in 2019. And for us, that is something that we're really proud of, but also illustrates the fact that we need to make sure that there is not only representation, but resources. Part of our story is talking about how the majority of our suburban residents are coming from, of course, Cicero being number 1, Berwyn, Stickney, and Summit. But now we are seeing folks from North Riverside, Elgin, Maywood, Melrose Park, Des Plaines, sometimes as far away as Justice. Sometimes we get somebody from Aurora. And what we need folks to know in the Assembly as well as in the Senate is that we need to make sure that we can respond not only to the representation, but what does representation mean? Resources. Because right now, the suburban response to resources with regards to either local municipalities, townships, whether a suburb is a town or a city, or at the Cook County level, we don't have that yet. And that there is not enough, I think, coordinated mobilization to make sure that our elected officials are taking care of our population and other Black and other Black communities and other immigrant communities. And so I think, that is something that to us is really important. And I think we also in our testimony really wanted to highlight, if you need any further evidence of why this redistricting is so important when we talk about resources, we have to talk about COVID. So we did 3 different community assessments during the pandemic. The first one was done in spring of 2020. Then we did one near the fall of 2020, and then we did another one in February 2021. We got over 600 respondents. And this is like a major part of our storytelling, because what we found is this is the information coming from our community of how dire the situation is in terms of the impact of COVID on their lives, their families, their income. And then if we start telling the story in the suburbs, particularly, and I think this is probably also true of Dulce and others that reach suburban residents, is that we know that there are more resources in the city than there are in the suburbs. That when it came to any kind of relief program, we would have to see, does this person, one, do they qualify because they're undocumented? They may not. Or because of the place that they reside, do they not qualify because the suburbs don't have the same resources that the city does? And that we need to make sure that in this redistricting process, in these hearings, we talk about that, how important representation is, and the resources that hopefully would be allocated properly as part of that. And so again, highlighting, the fact that we gave out so much money during, have done during COVID, we're continuing to do emergency cash assistance. And really during this process, what we've learned is that it's really difficult to do the outreach in the suburbs. We know that, hands off to all of those that are concentrated, but for us, out in the suburbs, we're the only ones really doing community organizing in the Western Suburban Cook. We need more hands on deck. And so redistricting, like Dulce said, is more difficult, having that conversation. We're hoping to invite MALDEF out to one of our live Café en Acciones on Facebook, where we do have an audience to reach those individuals, because without that, we know our residents in the suburbs will not be participating or even know about the process.
Thank you, Linda. I wish we had more than 45 minutes to have a conversation around redistricting. It definitely warrants it. We are at time though. I want to thank Dulce, Linda, Cesar for your time. I know you're extremely busy. For folks that are listening in, we will follow up and send the presentation that Stephen and I put together. As far as the process going forward, Stephen, do you kind of want to give some last minute remarks and just wrap up the event, please?
Yeah, thanks so much, Roberto. So again, thanks so much for Roberto to really, quarterbacking all of this, and to Linda, Dulce, and Cesar for sharing just your great thoughts in your communities. The legislature hears enough from Latino Policy Forum, from MALDEF. They need to hear more from you all about what this means about your communities. These stories of like how these resources actually went through, because it is a partnership with the legislature. The legislature, they're worried about their next elections, and that's good, because that means that they have to be worried about how they keep the community happy and how they can, be real responsive to our needs. So thank you all for being here and for your participation, and please follow up with us if you have any questions. Happy to be more detailed conversations with you in the future. And then of course, redistricting is not just the process that ends when the maps are released. We have to make sure those maps actually work for our communities. So I'll keep in touch in this conversation.
One final plug, thank you, Stephen, is the Latino Policy Forum does have a redistricting advisory committee. We meet every 2-3 weeks. We will send that invite to the folks on this call, and hopefully you can join us as we continue that conversation. With that, please come back in 2 minutes. We're going to transition to our next session. Again, Dulce, Linda, Cesar, thank you so much for your time. We'll see you soon. Take care.